Hi, Mystery Recap here. Today I'm going to explain a mystery horror movie called Pontypool. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with a radio announcement about a missing cat named Honey. It was last seen on the previous Thursday morning. That day, a local woman named Miss Corlett Pissine had swerved her car near a bridge to avoid crashing into the cat. Radio host blabbers about several unrelated and senseless things. For a good few minutes, it is obvious that this was done on purpose. Scene shifts to a sleepy small town of Pontypool, where local radio host Grant is driving through heavy snow. He's arguing with his agent on the phone about finding a job away from this godforsaken place. However, the agent says that he will have to stick to this gig for the time being. This makes Grant so angry that he throws his cell phone towards the passenger seat next to him shortly afterwards. His cell phone starts ringing again, so Grant stops the car by the roadside. He is about to take the call when suddenly a woman appears out of nowhere. She begins to hit her palm on the passenger window and keeps muttering about blood before disappearing into the night. Grant is certainly puzzled by what just happened, but he continues on his way and soon arrives at the radio station he works. Once he is inside, the station's technical assistant Laurel-Ann greets him warmly. The duo have a quick chit-chat before Grant enters his sound booth, goes on air. He introduces the listeners to his producer, Sydney Briar, and his technical assistant, Laurel-Ann. He then reveals that Laurel-Ann was deployed in Afghanistan not too long ago, but this makes Sydney laugh, and she calls him a newbie. As everyone in town knows, Laurel-Ann is a war veteran. After some playful banter between the three, they then switch to Ken. They're on the field. Reporter, however, as the radio show continues, Sydney gets increasingly frustrated by Grant's jock style. He pokes satirical jobs at Ken and also makes jokes about several local issues. Sydney asks him to reel back his dark humour style, but Grant continues doing what he likes and spouting off whatever comes to his mind. He refuses to listen to Sydney's direction, so she takes him off the air before he's finished off with his rants. They then get into an argument, Sydney telling him that he should be sharing news and not pulling the audience's leg. She talks about the danger of such gossip, while Grant defends what he's doing. He tells her that he's just trying to piss people off, because that's how they'll build a core of loyal listeners. However, Sydney tells him that people in small towns are fiercely proud. They need to know facts and not feel like the presenter is just a jerk. With the radio show, she goes on to let him know that he will embarrass and alienate his audience if he continues in this way. Perhaps a podcast would be a more successful venture. After this heated argument, Grant gets back on air and shares his story about the strange woman he saw on the way to work. Earlier, he asks his listeners if he should have called 911 or just moved on with his life. Just then, Laurel-Ann informs Sydney about an ongoing hostage situation at a nearby restaurant. There isn't much information about this incident, so Laurel-Ann tries to tune directly into the local police's radio. Sydney, on the other hand, checks her own sources and asks the technical assistant not to let Grant know about this. Unfortunately for her, Laurel-Ann has already passed on the message to his earpiece. Following this, Grant cuts off his call-in seg to report on the situation. Disney asks him to let it go, since the police officers are probably drunk, as it's the end of ice fishing season. But Grant zeroes in on this information and shares it on air, commenting that everyone in Pontypool being drunk is a very common occurrence. As he is cracking this joke, he gets more information that the hostage situation is already resolved itself. The police have 2 suspects in custody, both of whom are unarmed. The 3 people they were supposedly holding up have fled the scene enraged. Sydney storms into the recording booth while Grant is chuckling to himself about the absurdity of this case. He says that they need to learn to laugh at themselves sometime, but she points out that story is not funny. The policemen he was talking about are alcoholics who are just trying to keep their jobs. Who cares if that results in people getting killed? She also explains that Ken, the Grant was making fun of on air, isn't actually in a helicopter as previously stated. He is, in fact, in his car on top of a nearby hill for aerial view. Ken just plays helicopter sound effects to reassure the listeners that the station actually can afford such things. Following this, a slightly serious Grant proceeds to talk about the next breaking news story, but Ken calls in once more to notify them about a protest outside the offices of Dr. John Mendez. He reports that there are hundreds of people surrounding the building currently. Ken continues that the people seem to be trying to cram themselves inside. A shocking turn of events. Ken follows up that the side of the building seems to have burst and people are spilling out, getting trampled and killed. A shocked Grant asks them if there's any police around, and Ken mentions that there's a convoy of trucks, military vehicles, and helicopters. The line then gets cut off, as Ken states that the road is blocked, and he can't leave. Laurel-Ann tries to reach the police department to confirm this news, but can't reach anyone. They're also unable to contact Ken again, and have no other news about the supposed riot. Following this, Laurel-Ann and Sidney work in the background, while Grant puts on a local band to Lawrence of Arabia. On air, the two ladies can't find any other news channel reporting on it. Laurel-Ann has a hysterical caller on the line who seems to be near the situation. After the performance of the band, Sidney tells Grant that they have a total of 10 eyewitnesses in town who are willing to share what they know. They are going live with a local man named Steve first. Grant quickly opens up with the news again, reminding his listeners of the developing story. They put Steve on air, but can barely hear anything on his end, aside from static and chaos. On top of this, the other 9 eyewitnesses waiting are no longer on the line, and they're still unable to reach Ken. Laurel-Ann and Sidney are overwhelmed with calls people claiming to be eyewitnesses. There is no official report yet, but what they have gathered is that a total of 75 people have died, and at least twice that number are injured. Eventually, they get word from Constable Roseland of the Ontario Provincial Police. He explains that they answered a 1-1 call at 7 in the morning at a local senior citizen facility. A large number of people were occupying the building and trying to enter an elderly woman's room. The woman has since died from injuries, and the people were chanting something about Hitler and some hurricane, but that's all they get from the constable, before cutting them off for what they deem as crazy talk. After a while, BBC World's Nigel contacts them for the breaking story, as they're currently the only station reporting on what's going on. In Pontypool, Grant is in shock for a moment before or answering Nigel, and providing all the information that they have. The latter claims it's a terrorist attack, given Canada's history of separatists, but Grant dodges such rumours. He explains that they can neither confirm nor deny since there's not much information regarding what's going on. Nigel then thanks the station for the information and cuts off the line shortly afterwards. Ken calls back, begging them to send help as soon as possible. He explains that he's hiding in a grain silo near the train tracks since he's being chased. Ken requests them to contact the authorities, but the police hotline's been unreachable ever since. They got into the studio. Grant asks for some more information, and Ken reveals that some of the people chasing cannibals going as far as to compare them to dogs. As the conversation goes on, Ken starts panicking as he sees the crazy people taking someone out of a van, biting them. He soon reports that he's been found, making everyone in the station panic. Apparently a crazy teenager is in the silo with Ken and can't attack since he's missing hands and can't move. Ken mentions that the teenager seems to be mouthing something and says he'll take a closer look, but before they can find out more, the call is interrupted by a French audio transmission. Laurel-Ann immediately translates, which asks everyone to avoid family members, restrain from using terms of endearment, rhetorical discourse, and conversing in the English language. There is also a disclaimer not to translate this message. Sidney then relays that they got a call from Constable Roseland, who ordered them to stay inside, as Pontypool is now under quarantine. In the meantime, Ken's back on the line and asks if they got his audio. He repeats his recording again, reminding them that it's coming from the crazy teenage boy. Meanwhile, someone starts whispering, "Help me, mummy," a creepy, soft voice. It is obvious that the voice is definitely not of a teenage boy. Ken then describes it as a child screaming inside. The teenage boy's breath Grant has a hard time believing the reports that are coming in, so he asks for a breather outside. Sidney begs him to return to his chair. Since they can't take a break, our guy has already made up his mind. In fact, he thinks the two women are messing with his head by playing an elaborate prank. He then takes a step outside and says that nothing is out there except a cold day at this moment. Laurel-Ann notices something, though she immediately closes the door and locks it. A swarm of people soon try to force their way inside the building, repeating the words they heard Sidney say a few seconds ago. This freaks the trio out. They head inside and restart their program. While Grant is reading out the obituaries, Laurel-Ann is tending to Sidney, who seems to be panicking as the two ladies talk. Laurel-Ann begins to repeat the word missing. Out of the blue, when she hears the office tea kettle whistling, she starts to imitate it as well. Sydney stares at her for a minute before suddenly noticing someone climbing in from the window of the equipment room. To her surprise, the intruder introduces himself as Dr. Mendez. He tries to explain his strange arrival, but notices Laurel-Ann making a noise like she's a cattle. The other two then go to the recording booth and lock themselves in. Laurel-Ann suddenly comes back to her senses and tells them that she's all right. While trying to open the door, however, Dr. Mendez makes a chilling statement. Laurel-Ann doesn't know it yet, but she's hunting them. He tells the other two not to allow the sound from the recording booth to go outside. As soon as he says this, Laurel-Ann stops trying to open the door and goes for the window instead. Next, Grant attempts to start an interview with Dr. Mendez, while Laurel-Ann starts throwing herself against the window of the recording booth. Doctor comments that she's hearing voices in her head and things will grow vicious. He apologizes for what he's talking about, but points out that he has seen this happen all morning. At his office seconds later, Ken calls again and reveals that the teenage boy that was with them, his dad. He then begins acting weirdly as he starts repeating the word simple. This makes the people in the studio realize that he's been infected, so they cut off the phone. As they are talking about Ken, they notice that Laurel-Ann is eating her lower lip. Dr. Mendez asks Grant if he's sure she can't hear them, and the latter confirms it, but then he wonders if she can read lips, which lights up a bulb in the doctor's head. He realizes that whatever is happening, it's viral, but not of blood, air, or in the body, but rather in words. Specifically, the English language. The bug only enters its when the infected word is heard as well as understood. It then copies itself in the person's understanding, driving them crazy. Hence, the group decides to shut the radio show off for the time being. Meanwhile, Sydney gets a call from her kids, and as she's talking to them, Laurel-Ann resumes trying to throw herself against the booth's window. Seeing this, Dr. Mendez comments that something strange is happening to her, something he hasn't seen before. Laurel-Ann then throws up a lot of blood on the window, including her organs, then falls back. Dr. Mendez thinks this is what happens to the bug when it can't find its next victim. Either that or she's not infected. She just ate Taco Bell after a few minutes. Several infected people enter the building, so Grant turns off the light. They try to hide behind the booth. They hope that by playing the loudspeaker outside the building, they will be able to distract the attackers. The trio then decides to play a recording of Grant, stating Sydney Briar is alive. Their plan surprisingly works, but Dr. Mendez also starts repeating the word, breathe. Hearing that he's about to give end to the virus, he starts speaking in Armenian, as he knows that the virus transmits only in the English language. Next, Sydney goes to talk to Grant in French, which he understands a little. Jamapple. I don't know. They leave the doctor and escape, but run into one of the victims who jumps on Sydney. After an intense battle, though, they somehow kill the attacker. As they're talking about their next step, the power shuts down and the Canadian anthem starts playing over the radio. This would bring the infected victims back inside, though the duo heads for the equipment room, closely followed by Dr. Mendez. Once they lock the door, the doctor climbs outside through the window, luring the infected victims away from the building. As hours pass by, Grant tries to figure out how the virus works. Sydney, who is now panicking, begins to repeat the word kill. This makes him realize that Sydney is succumbing to the virus, so he goes to confuse her by connecting the word kill. The kiss miraculously. The plan works, and Grant realizes that this could be the cure to the virus. He then convinces Sydney to air one last show, but as they start their program, an explosion goes off around them. Nonetheless, Grant starts connecting unrelated words. Sample is staple, and everything means something completely different. He tells his listeners to stop understanding what they're saying and simply listen to him. Grant also suggests that sample is a color, sky is a person, and laughter is walking, and Amy Schumer is funny. He tells those listening that the military is killing scared people. In an impassioned rant, he yells out that it's not the end of the world, but rather the end of the day. Before signing off, the countdown in French begins, and the movie ends with Sydney and Grant kissing in the recording booth. Roll out. Thank you for watching.